Good afternoon. My name is Regina Hopkins, and I'm with the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon on what you need to know about charitable solicitation and registration in the DC area. First, I apologize. We are downtown, and from time to time you may hear sirens in the background, and I apologize for that. It's just the price we're paying for being close to the White House on the day before inauguration. And I'd like to know that a couple of things. The first is that this session is being recorded, and we will have a link to the recording later on today in Law Help, which is our website. You'll get an email with a link that will show you how to go. And on the interface on the right-hand side, there is a copy of the PowerPoint that you can download. So feel free to do that either as we go along or afterwards. It's under handouts. You'll see it there. And then finally, there is a question box that allows you to put questions there. Type them in, and I will stop from time to time during the presentation and ask questions. So with that, we will get started, and we'll talk about it. So if you want to solicit charitable contributions on behalf of any organization, you have to register to do so in 39 states and the District of Columbia. Each of them have statutes that require registration before the solicitation takes place. The solicitation requirements vary from state to state. Some are more rigorous than others, and some are more expensive than others. Unfortunately, we live in an area where we have 3 of the more expensive states, but be that as it may. The 11 states that don't require regulation, that don't regulate solicitations are Arizona, Delaware, for those of you who might have a more regional presence in terms of fundraising, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Montana, Nebraska, South Dakota, Texas, Vermont, and Wyoming. Sometimes they change from time to time. Arizona used to require registration. Now it does not. It repealed it, whereas Nevada didn't, but then it enacted legislation. So that list does change from time to time, but basically, for our purposes, Maryland, Virginia, and DC all require registration. You are required to register in the jurisdiction in which you're incorporated. I think everybody pretty much understands that. But you also must register in each state in which you solicit contributions. So if you're fundraising in, say, West Virginia, you have to register there, even though you may not have an office there, and even though you may not be incorporated there. And even if you unsuccessfully solicit donations there, so if you send a solicitation to 100 people in West Virginia and none of them contribute, it's the act of the solicitation that requires registration, not the contribution. So let's say you're located in either DC or Maryland or Virginia. What does that mean? It means you're basically going to have to register in all 3 states. It's just a practical matter that in the metro area, people who may volunteer from you may work in DC, but they live in Virginia, or if you're in Northern Virginia, you may have people who move their historic donors, but then they move to Maryland or they move into the city. People just move around. They may be their volunteer activities may be tied to work, and so it's just too difficult to segment them. So you pretty much have to accept the fact that you're going to have to register in all 3 states. And then the other kicker is for example, solicitations that you put in newspapers or on the radio or TV will trigger a registration requirement in the entire metro area. So if you're on a local television station and and you're soliciting donations and you hear and the television station puts up your website and says if you're interested in making donations, and they flash your website, well, that's not just going strictly to, say, DC. It's going to be broadcast in Southern Maryland and Northern Virginia, so that's one of the reasons why, practically speaking, you have to register. Now, if you register or solicit contributions nationwide, you must register in all 30 United States as well as the District of Columbia. And for example, the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, we're an independent 501c3, and we do solicit all DC Bar members who manage to live in all 50 states. So we solicit contributions in all. We register in every state. There are de minimis dollar thresholds in each state, but they're generally based upon total income. So you'll see something in the statute that says if you have less than $5,000 in contributions, you don't have to register, or $2,500, or it's $1,500 in DC. What they're talking about is your total contributions, more generally speaking, regardless of where they're from. A few states will say it ties it to how much you're raising in a particular state. So they'll say if you raise less than $2,500 in this state, you don't have to register, because they're talking about there's not enough critical mass in the state to generate the requirement. But most states view it as if you have $5,000 in income, then you have enough money to register in our state. So regardless of where the donations are coming, you do have to register. So what is a solicitation? That's the first question. And that definition will vary from state to state, as you'll see when we get to Maryland and Virginia. In DC, it is very broadly defined. It's basically any verbal or written request for money. And so it can take the form of a mailing or a posting or a publication. Circulation of any written advertisement. If you have a flyer or something in one of those free shopper things, you have a column which has a solicitation request in it in a local newspaper, community newspaper. It could be television and radio appearances in which you ask for money, or telephone calls if you call people. It includes press releases, so it can be in writing, like emails, mailings, newsletters that have a solicitation included in the newsletter, any of that, or just a verbal request for money. And it's any communication regarding an event, such as a fundraiser, a benefit concert, a party, exhibition, performance, any fundraising activity that the public is requested to attend, or for which the public is asked to make a contribution. So if you have a silent auction, you have a fundraising dinner, you have a photo exhibition, and in connection with that, you're asking for money, all of those are going to be solicitations. And it includes the sale of merchandise or other types of things that are designed to bring in revenue. So if you ask people to buy a t-shirt or participate in a car wash or anything like that, if the object of that is to raise money, then you're going to have to register with respect to that. So basically, it's any ask in DC. Extremely broad definition. It includes raffle tickets or drawings. It includes grant requests. So if you submit a grant request to another foundation in DC, that's going to be a solicitation. It includes requests for in-kind contributions, interest-free loans, and who you solicit is also very broadly defined. It includes individuals, foundations, corporations, and the government. So if you submit a request to the DC government for a grant, then that's going to be a solicitation that's going to trigger registration requirements. So every business, so the solicitation registration is done to the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, and you get the number. You can see there's a hyperlink there to their website, and let me just close that so you can see there. And they're responsible for administering the charitable solicitation license. So in order to be registered, you have to be a 501c3 organization. And this can be a problem from startup organizations because you want to raise money to help get started, but you can't register until you've gotten started and have 501c3 status. So it's sort of a chicken and an egg type of thing. One way, when you talk to the people in the DC government, they acknowledge that fact. And if you're only asking for a few family friends, I don't think it's going to be much of an issue. I don't think they're going to come after you. But if you want raising money more broadly through a fundraising event or something, you can ask another 501c3 organization to take the donations on your behalf and then turn them over to you once you get 501c3 status. And as long as they're registered, that should be fine. Fiscal sponsors do have legal control over the funds, and they can't use it if it would violate their 501c3 purpose. So there is that part of it. So you have to ensure that even though you're a startup organization, that it's going to be used for charitable purposes in order to take advantage of that. So what's the process in DC? All organizations, regardless of who they are, for-profit, not-for-profit, they're a partnership, they're an LLC, they're a corporation, they're a nonprofit charitable organization, they're a sole proprietor, everybody has to have a basic business license. It's a requirement in DC. And in order to get a basic business license, a nonprofit must ensure it's registered to do business through DCRA, the Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs. They have to have a registered agent, someone who can accept legal notices on their behalf, and they have to have tax-exempt status under DC law and a tax ID number. And once you've done that, then you can make an application for a basic business license. So what does that mean? Well, when you set up your nonprofit corporation in DC, you've registered with DCRA, so that's pretty straightforward. If you're what's known as a foreign corporation, meaning you're incorporated in Maryland or Virginia, you have to register with DCRA and say, we're doing business in DC, and here's our registration, just like you have to register in your home state. And soliciting contributions is doing business in the state. So before you can get a basic business license with the goal of soliciting funds in DC, you're going to have to register as a corporation incorporated in another state but doing business in DC. And there's a form that you fill out to do that. It's very simple, straightforward. It'll cost you $80 a year, and that's what you do. And then the other thing you can do is the registered agent is someone that you have to designate on your form with DSCRA, and it's a person, like if they have to send you a legal notice, who they send it to, and you can select a board member or a staff person with a business address in DC to serve as your registered agent. And then finally, in order to be exempt under DC law from taxes, you have to file an FR 164, and you have to get a DC tax ID number, which is filing for FR 500. Again, they're very simple. They piggyback on the federal system, but you do have to actually do the paperwork. So once you've done that paperwork, you can then file for a basic business license. So if you're in Maryland, you're a Maryland corporation, register as a foreign corporation, designate someone to be your registered agent, and get your tax ID and exemption information from DC government. Same with Virginia. So then you file what's known as a Basic Business License EZ form. Let me do this. Oh, they take you to the website. I'm sorry, they've been having trouble with the website. I practiced this yesterday and it's difficult. So, but there is a form. It's a 2-page form, very straightforward, that just asks for information, and you put down the code that you're a charitable organization. And then what you submit is what's known as a clean hand self-certification. I clicked this earlier and it was working. No, sorry about that. It just is a certified that you don't owe money to the DC government. You're not behind in any other, like in any fees or taxes or anything else that you do. You just say we're up to date. Your certificate of occupancy for your premise in DC. If you're going to have a presence here, a copy of our IRS letter, a certified resolution. No, sorry about this. I tried this earlier today and they were working. The links were working. For some reason, they're not working now. So, so they have. If you click through these links, they'll take you to the resolution that they want. They want a board resolution authorizing registration. They want a copy of your IRS letter. They want your tax ID number. If you have a physical office in DC, a certificate of occupancy. They want a certificate that you swear that you don't owe any other money to the DC government. And if you're using a professional fundraiser in DC, the contracts that you're using. And you submit that. You can submit it online. And in addition, if you're going to have individuals soliciting on your behalf and accepting donations on your behalf, you are required to get solicitor information cards for those individuals. If those of you who are in DC and you'll see people on the street at various stops, near metro stops, asking for money for various organizations, they will have on a lanyard hanging there, you can look at the solicitor information cards, and that's what you get for people who are going to go and make one-on-one solicitations like that. And to get the cards, you have to submit a list of the individuals who are soliciting on your behalf. There is an exception for that, and that is for small contributions made by people who are unpaid for their services. For example, if you have some board members who are selling raffle tickets, or they may be selling some fundraising tickets to an event, and as long as they're not getting more than $1,500 and you're not paying them, then they don't need a solicitor information card. It's only people on the street who people like that are going door to door and doing in-person solicitations that need them. The filing fee in DC for charitable solicitation is $412.50. That will change from year to year. That's what it is now. It's once every, and then you have to renew it every 2 years. So basically, it's $206 a year, which isn't cheap, but by standards. But it is. That's the one good thing. But although you have to remember when which year you have to register, whether you're renewing in an even or odd year, and you have to display in a prominent place a certificate of registration, which I'm sitting in my office and I have someone else here with me, and if he looks over to there, he can see our certificate of registration from DC. So you do have to put it someplace, but they will give you a actual certificate of registration. There are exemptions. The first one is for organizations that do not raise more than $1,500 per year. Organizations that solicit donations only from their members or members' families. And the requirement is that the governing body approves the solicitation and that a person is not a member merely because they gave you a donation. So you can't call all your donors members, and now you don't have to register. Members are people like congregants at a church. They may be members of a Girl Scout troop or Boy Scout troop, their parents, or there may be people who have certain voting rights with respect to electing directors to your organization. That's what they mean by members, not the general public. Also, if you engage in workplace giving campaigns, you don't have to register as long as it's being done under the employer's supervision. And religious organizations do not have to solicit. That solicit for educational and religious purposes are also exempt. You do have to submit a certified copy of your IRS letter and an affidavit saying that the exemption is still in effect. And you have to wait until your application is approved before you can do it. Okay, so that's DC. And let me just pause to look and see what questions we have about DC. What about e-solicitations? We'll talk about email solicitations and solicitations over the web in a little bit, because those are a little tricky, particularly since if you have something on your website, you may not know who is soliciting. Now, when we talked about what is a fundraising event, and someone asked, does this include information educational events where it does raise money, but that's not necessarily the primary purpose? Yes. Anytime you have a fundraising, even if it's in connection with another event, that is that does make that event a fundraising event. It may not be the only purpose of the event, but it is one of the purposes, and it does trigger the registration requirement. Next question is, we have a local donor that has influence on her family's foundation that is based in Alabama. She reached out to us asking us to provide basic information, articles and corporation bylaws, etc., in order for the family foundation to make a contribution to us. We do not solicit those funds, but we did receive them. Do we need to register in Alabama? Possibly. You'd have to look at the statute in Alabama to see what it says. Whether that's the fact that you went through a family foundation, it's possible that it could, but it may be that it doesn't meet the definition. I don't know Alabama law on itself. That probably, if they have a definition similar to DC, the fact that you provided the information to the person for the purposes of getting a donation, even though you didn't directly contact the foundation, it probably would be enough in DC to trigger solicitation requirements, so registration requirements. So you'd have to be careful and see what Alabama law looks like. You can go to their website. Every state has a website that's fairly easy to use. You just Google Alabama Charitable Solicitation Laws, and they will take you to their information page, and they should have some good basic information about what triggers registration. Someone says, can the registered agent be myself with my home address? Yes, that's acceptable as long as the address is in DC. For the DC registration exemptions, would members include alumni of universities or fraternal organizations? I would say probably not. Basically, unless they're applying to be alumni, the mere fact that they're alumni, you'd have to have some sort of membership requirement, and there'd have to be something tangible to the membership. Are they getting some benefit? Do they have some voting rights? Is there something that they get more than just, the name member? If they're just alumni and there's nothing else, then they would not qualify as members under DC law. And some states are even more strict of who's a member. But I would say something more than what you indicated would be required. Okay. Regarding the minimum dollar amount, do you register before or after you begin soliciting? Register before you solicit, especially if you know you're only going to raise $1,000, I suppose you could not register, but most of us start fundraising with the hope of getting more than $1,500, so I would assume you register before you do that. Is there a penalty if you haven't filed the business license, but you have all the required criteria for it? Yes, there are penalties for soliciting without registering. It varies from state to state. Sometimes it can be so much like $5 per solicitation, and every donor is every time. If you sent mail out to 1,000 people, you have solicited 1,000. You have solicited 1,000 solicitations, so you could have a $5,000 fine. So some states will most states will rap you on the knuckles and say you're soliciting without registering, and shame on you. And they'll give you a chance to clean up your act first, but sometimes they'll just come down with you, right away with a boom. Here's the fine. So you're really playing roulette there. So yes, there are sanctions, and if they send you a letter telling you to stop soliciting until you register because you're in violation of the law, not only do you have to deal with any potential fines in that state, but every time you register in another state, you're going to have to disclose that you engaged in unauthorized solicitation. The first thing, one of the questions on every single form is, were you enjoined from fundraising in any state for violations of their solicitation laws? And you're going to have to check yes, and it means you're going to get extra scrutiny, and your life is going to be more difficult. So I would not recommend it. Regarding solicitation cards, if a board member is sending out solicitation letters to his or her list of friends or colleagues on our own letterhead. Do they need a solicitation card? No, because what you would do is have them send the donation to the organization, and that solves the problem because they won't have the money in hand. It's when they take the money in hand. That's the thing about the person on the street. You are giving them the money. They're not giving you a card to mail out to mail to somebody else. They are taking your cash. It's going to be cash, and they're taking it from you, and you want to know that you're giving cash to somebody who's authorized. They're not just saying that they're fundraising on behalf of Save the Children. They actually have an identification showing that they're doing that, and that's the purpose of the card. So if you have a board member sending out letters, have them direct the contribution to the organization. Okay, what happens if your registration is rejected? It shouldn't be rejected. There really isn't any reason to reject it as long as you have all the requisite information. The only reason, once you have all the various paperwork, there's no substantive review of the application. Let's put it that way. They're not deciding whether they cannot decide whether they like your solicitation, whether they think you're soliciting for a good purpose. It's just it's more of a disclosure than it is a substantive review. Are families of a school considered members? I'd have to know more about that, and I'm going to answer one more question. I know there may be a few more. Okay, and there's another one. For members without an established board, who can you place as a member? I'm not sure I even understand that question. We do not and target the families of the students. A public charter school, we do not. We do an annual giving campaign and target families of students. You're probably you may very well have to register. We'd have to look at the regulations carefully, but we're going to have to look. You'd have to look at it carefully, depending on because unlike a lot of states, DC does not have an educational exemption. A lot of states will exempt educational organizations from the requirement to solicitation. DC does not. So the fact that you're a school, it's not necessarily going to get you off the hook. Okay. Maryland. Maryland, all organizations are required to register with the Secretary of State before soliciting in Maryland. The organizations must submit an application with a copy of your Articles of Incorporation and Bylaws, your IRS letter, your Form 990, the names and addresses of the Board of Directors, all contracts with Professional Solicitor Fundraising Council located in the state of Maryland, a statement disclosing your mission, and a statement detailing how the contributions will be used. In addition, if you have your contributions are at least $3,000 but less than $750,000, you must have an independent certified accountant do a financial review. That's what happens is the accountant comes in, they look at your books. It's not a full audit; it's somewhat less than that, and therefore it's less expensive. But it does cost you money, so you may decide you may just go for the full audit. But once you hit that $300,000 and you're under $750,000, you must submit a financial review. And if your contributions are at least $750,000 per year, you must submit an audit by an independent CPA. Okay. The registration fees in Maryland are based on your gross level of charitable corporation or contributions, and you'll see there it ranges from 0 if you're very small to $300 if your contributions are $500,000 or more. You also have to submit an annual update, and that with that annual update, you must send the most recent 990. If you don't have a 990 for some reason, or you file a 990N, you have an alternative form that will contain much of the information that is on a 990. You have to update your board members, your fundraising contracts, and the financial review or audit, depending on how much income you raise. Generally, it's due 6 months after the close of the fiscal year, but there's an automatic extension to the 15th day of the 11th month. And you must pay the annual fee, which is the that amount of money, depending on how big you are. There are exemptions under DC law, under Maryland law as well. Tax-exempt religious organizations and their parents and schools are exempt. They do have to submit a copy of their IRS letter, their articles of incorporation and bylaws, and their mission statement in order to get the exemption. Organizations that raises funds only from its members, and under Maryland law, you have to confer some benefit to the members, and the members must have the right to vote or hold office in the organization in order to qualify, and you have to submit the bylaw showing the members' rights and a statement of who will be solicited. If you solicit for a specific named individual where the gross amount is delivered to that individual, you don't have to register. And here's an important point, and I'm going to take a second to just underline this one. If you're soliciting only for-profit corporations and private foundations, you don't have to register in Maryland. So if you are basically only soliciting foundations in Maryland or big corporations, don't worry, you don't have to register in Maryland if you're not doing email solicitations or something like that. You do need to submit the latest 990 and financial documents to establish that that's where your income sources are coming from, but there is that exemption essentially for very big, sophisticated donors are the only, they don't have to have the same protections the state of Maryland feels, so that doesn't trigger registration. And if you receive less than $25,000 from Maryland residents or non-residents, you don't have to do it to register. And in all of these cases, in order to qualify for an exemption, you can't employ a professional solicitor. That does not mean your employees. It means a third-party professional solicitor. In addition, in Maryland, organizations are required to include a disclosure statement on all written solicitations. And this includes a statement that the copy of the current financial statement is available on request, the address and phone number for where you can get that, and a statement that it's also available from the Maryland Solicitations Act, from the Secretary of State as well. And here you'll see on the slide some text, some examples of basically the Maryland disclosure requirements. And for those of you who are wondering, do people really do that? Do they really put those disclosure statements on it? This is a sample of nonprofits that solicit around the country and the disclosure statements. I'll show you what it is in a second. But basically, the most commonly, big nonprofits who solicit in many states have, Maryland is not alone. We'll see that Virginia has the same requirement, or has required language as well. There are probably a dozen states that require that you disclose to the donor their ability to get additional financial information from your organization before they make a donation. And so, and you're supposed to include that with every solicitation. So when you talk to the big national nonprofits, you will see on their solicitations somewhere a statement that lists all this. And this is I'll show you the substance of the language first, but I just wanted to show you these are all return envelopes where people have been asked to solicit money, and here's the envelope to mail your donation back. And on the back of the envelope, there it is. That's the required statement. Some people put it on the back of their response devices. Some people, you'll see it on the back of their solicitation letter. But that's what it is. You can, now that I've pointed it out to you, you will start seeing it everywhere. This is the language that you have to put, that required disclosure language saying, which is what we discussed here, a copy of the current financial statements of our nonprofit are available by writing to John Doe, P.O. Box 123, Anytime, USA 22222, or by calling and here's our 800 number. You can also get copies of the information from the Secretary of State, and there's the information. That language has to be included with each solicitation, and as I said, a lot of people put it on the back of their response envelopes. One even went so clever as to put it inside the response envelope just to do it more low-key. But I'm going to show you some examples. You also have to do it online. If you're soliciting donations online, you have to do it, and I'm going to show you some examples. Okay, this is the DC bar. If you do that, if you donate to us, this is our donation page, donate to pro bono, and you'll see our legal disclosure. And there it is. It shows, and there's our Maryland disclosure, that you can get copies of our financial statements by doing the Maryland. And just as long as we're here, I'll show you the Virginia statement that we have. And then we'll go to World Wildlife Fund. Oh, for some reason I have just donate pro bono. Let's see if Save the Children. It's not working. Anyway, but if you go to these, let me copy this. I don't know why it's just doing legal. I apologize. No. We're having all sorts of problems with our, and it's not like letting me copy. Oh well, I apologize. But if you cut and paste these, you will see that they will take you to the websites of those other places, and they have similar language as to what we have here, like I said, which is, and you can see all the financial information. There's Colorado, Florida has it, New Jersey, Michigan, Mississippi, North Carolina. Some of them require that it be underlined, some of them require that it be all capped, some of it require that it be bold type. And so with hyperlinks to their websites and things like that. And they all have required language. And when you string them all together, this is what it looks like. That's essentially every language. You've bunched them all into one paragraph. Okay, so we've done Maryland. Let me just check for the questions. Someone asked for, will a copy of the slides be provided? They are available. If you look in the handouts section of the interface, go to webinar interface, you will see a copy of the handouts. Do you have to register if you solicit state or local government grants? It depends on the jurisdiction. In DC you do, in Maryland and Virginia you wouldn't. What if we use Network for Good in the United Way? We'll talk about that later on online donations. Generally speaking, if they're registered in most states, that's sufficient. But in some states, even though you're using an intermediary like Network for Good, you're still going to have to register. So, and someone said also Rezo and CrowdWise, same thing. Okay, so in Virginia, they also have a requirement that you register. You have to file a copy of the Articles of Incorporation and Bylaws, the IRS letter, your 990. If you file a 990N, then they just want a balance sheet verified by your treasurer, your officers, directors, and other executive staff, a list of each professional fundraiser solicitor who works for the organization, a statement detailing the percentage of your income that's spent on fundraising, and a statement describing the purposes for which you're fundraising. And you have to have an initial $100 registration fee, and then you have an annual fee thereafter. And again, you see it's based, as in Maryland, based on the size of your organization, going up to a maximum of $325 for organizations with $1 million or more of contributions. You have to file every year. The deadline is the 15th day of the 5th month. Mostly, think of when's your 990 due, and that's when your charitable solicitation is due. You can get an extension request, and the most common reason is because you haven't finished your 990. Once you've submitted your charter and bylaws with the initial legislation, you don't have to do it again unless they've been altered. if you amend your bylaws, you're going to have to resubmit them. There are exemptions, and one of them, someone asked about schools. This is one example where educational institutions are not required to register in Virginia. Persons requesting contributions solely for relief of a specified individual. Charitable organizations that have less than $5,000, and that's taken over a 3-year average, and that don't employ professional paid fundraisers. Organizations that only solicit for members, and here again, as in Maryland, in order to be a member, you have to have the right to vote or to hold office in the organization. Organizations that do not have a physical office in Virginia but solicit from outside the state and have a local charter, chapter, branch, or affiliate that's registered there. So if you're a national organization or a regional organization and you're soliciting in Virginia, you don't have to register if you don't have an office there, but only if you have a local chapter that's already registered. There are exemptions for certain healthcare institutions, and again, there's a religious exemption, and for religious organizations and nonprofit organizations, again, that only submit through grant proposals submitted to for-profit corporations, nonprofit organizations, and private foundations. Again, so if you're in DC and you're only soliciting for a for-profit corporation like you want HP or Grumman to give you money, and that's the only people that you're asking in Virginia, then you don't have to register. There is an application to fill out for an exemption if you want to claim an exemption. And there it is. And a one-time $10 fee. Organizations that qualify as a church are not even required to submit a request. You're just not included in the statute. Again, Virginia, like Maryland, has a disclosure requirement. You have to put on your solicitations and receipts a statement that says a financial statement is available from the Secretary of the State Office of Consumer Affairs and the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services upon request. So that has to be included in your solicitation. And if we go back to what we had before, you saw in the whole laundry list of organizations that some were in Maryland and some were there was Maryland language, but also Virginia language. Now, you're thinking, so many forms. So many forms. How do I do this? A while ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, the states got together and came up with what is known as a unified registration statement. And the idea was you fill out the statement once and submit it to all the different states instead of having to fill out 10, 20, 30, 40 state forms, depending on how often you're registering, how many places you're soliciting. And so some jurisdictions will accept the uniform registration statement instead of requiring you to use their individual forms. Maryland and Virginia allow you to use the uniform registration statement. DC does not. The only problem with it is that every state has supplemental forms so that you have to fill out the uniform registration statement and the Maryland supplement or the Virginia supplement or the Pennsylvania supplement. So it saves you a little bit of time, but not nearly as much as you would think, because even though there's some of the basic information is contained in the unified registration statement, which we'll show here, unfortunately, so many of them have supplemental requirements that it just doesn't get you very far. It just doesn't save you as much time as they would like. There is another push to get a more uniform statement and stop with all the supplemental information, but that hasn't happened yet. And as I say, DC does not accept the uniform registration statement. They want you to fill out the basic business license application. So let me just do this before we go. For example, someone asked, do local jurisdictions within the states have registration requirements? In some states they do. It's not really an issue here. We don't have, there are some ways if you register with the state of Virginia, for example, you don't have to register in local jurisdictions. There was a provision that said if you only solicit in, say, Fairfax County and Alexandria and Arlington, you could get away with doing the statewide registration by just registering in those 6 Northern Virginia counties. But no one else does. But no one does that because it's just as cumbersome. It's not much cheaper. And what if one of your donors moves to Loudoun County? So most people, just virtually everybody, registers statewide in Virginia instead of trying to register in just a handful of counties, because it just doesn't save you enough time, energy, or effort to justify the risk that one day one of your donors will move to Richmond, and you won't figure that out. But if you go to places like Florida, they'll have, in addition to the state of Florida requiring registration, they will have. There are some cities and towns that also want to do it as well. So, online solicitations, email solicitations. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about third-party solicitations. Okay. Generally, email solicitations are the same as any other form of solicitation. If you send someone a piece of mail, you're soliciting them. If you send them a piece of email, you're soliciting them. So the fact that you're using electronic communication to do the solicitation doesn't change the requirement. It's no different than any other form. And you have to register in all applicable states to which you are sending emails. Now, sometimes you may not know where somebody is. You just have the happygirl123@gmail.com, and you may not know at first where they are, so it's hard to register. But if they send you a check, or they include their address when they fill out their credit card information or something like that, and you have reason to know where they are from, then you're going to have to register in those states. And then there are what are called passive solicitations. And just about every organization has a donate button on their websites. And in many of these cases, an organization is not otherwise reaching into the states. So, for example, you may have a Donate Now button, and someone who grew up in D.C. but now lives in California may go to your website and make a donation. And so you haven't mailed to California, you haven't emailed them, you haven't called them, you haven't asked them in any way for a donation. They've found you. So now the question is, do you have to now register in California because someone in California has given you money? And then some time back, about 15 years ago, the states adopted what is known as the Charleston Principles. And I won't read them through, but I'll just show you where they are. You can find them online, and they'll talk about what they are. And there they are, the general principles. And they're advisory and not binding on anyone. Some states are more strict than others in following the principles, and others, take them as guidance and don't follow them at all. But basically what they say is if all you have is a passive donation link, meaning that the donor has to find you, you're not finding the donor, then you will not be considered as soliciting donations in the state where the donor lives. So the person in California who grew up in D.C. is and decides that they're going to give money for some reason to your organization, you do not have to register in California. There are some caveats to that. The first is you can't use other means of communication to direct individuals in the state to visit your website. Like you can't send an email that says, we really like you to find out about our organization, and you have a hyperlink to your Donate Now page or something like that. That, although you may not actually ask for money in the email, you're directing them to your Donate Now website, so that is considered a solicitation. And the amount of donations that the organization receives from a particular state cannot be repeated and ongoing or substantial. And what this means that if you have a significant volume of contributions, as opposed to rare, isolated, or insubstantial, you're going to have to register even though you didn't solicit. And let me come up with some examples of how this can come up. Oftentimes it's because of natural disasters. You have a flood or a Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, or something happens that generates a natural disaster, and people from around the country decide that they want to give money to you. And in fact, people, unbeknownst to you or not with your direction, are publicizing and say, if you want to help out, give to, you know, the Help the Homeless organization in Northern Virginia. And so people are directing to your website, people are doing things, people are finding you on their own, and so all of a sudden you're getting a lot of money from a lot of states. That may be, if it's enough volume, that may trigger a registration requirement. Now, you could say it's rare or it's just ongoing. It's not ongoing or repeated. It's a one-time surge, and that may, in fact, get you out of the requirement of registration. But this is the important part. Once they've donated to you, you can't ever ask them for money again, because if you add them to your donor list and then you start sending them annual appeals and things like that, now you're soliciting money. So if that person in California gives you money and you say, great, and then you start soliciting them again, you send them an email, a year-end appeal, just like you send to everybody else on your donor list, not really thinking of it. Now you're solicited in California, now you have to register. Let me give you an example from me personally. I happened to be in Nashville sometime back, about 6 or 7 years ago, when there was severe flooding in Nashville, because my brother lives there. And so I made a contribution to the Nashville Foundation, which was handling the money for flood relief. I have never gotten a return solicitation from them. They took my money. They did not solicit me again, so they do not have, I happen to live in Virginia, so they don't have to register in Virginia because they never asked for another donation. In some, but not all states, if you use an intermediary such as Network for Good to accept and process the in-line donations, you can piggyback on their registration. But it's not true in all states. I believe it's fine in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C., but not in every state. So you have to check each state to make sure, and you can talk to Network for Good if you're going to sign up with them, where it's accepted and where you still have to register. And so when you do that, I would check with them. However, because they're going to know better than I. Now, the Charleston Principles do suggest that the state should consider whether, as a matter of prosecutorial discretion, public policy, and the prioritized use of limited resources, it should take action to enforce registration requirements as to charities who use an intermediary. And so the Charleston Principles strongly suggest that the state shouldn't do that. They shouldn't come after you for registering, for soliciting charities contributions without registering if you use Network for Good or something like that, but it's not required. And some states are particularly difficult about registering. Historically, states like North Carolina, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Connecticut have been particularly strict about registration requirements. You know, and so it just varies on the personality of the office holder enforcing the statute and the individuals and how strict they are. So you're going to have to look at it. So if you register, you're in D.C. or Northern Virginia or Maryland, that's probably going to be sufficient. You might have to think about registering West Virginia or Pennsylvania, depending on where you're located. If you have offices, Delaware, you're exempt, so you don't have to worry about Delaware. But depending on where you are, if you're near another state, you may want to consider registering there. And if you see a pattern of people from other states giving you money, again, you have to then say, have we crossed the materiality threshold that it should trigger registration requirements? So, okay. If we have a rare opportunity, I'm going to questions now. What if we have a rare opportunity to appear on national television and mention the organization's website for direct services? Your passive Donate Now button is on your website. Is that a solicitation? If in your rare opportunity to appear on nationwide television, you don't ask for money and you just send them to your homepage, you probably are going to be okay in most states because you are not specifically you're asking for money, but you know, some states would be more. The problem is it's 39 states, and there are 39 states with 39 unique personalities. In a lot of states, they would not worry about it, but there will be a handful of states that will, and so you're probably going to be. I can't promise you'll be okay. I can only say that you know, in most states you're probably going to be okay, but it's not an absolute guarantee. Is an electronic newsletter with a donate button or hyperlink considered passive or no? No. If you send somebody a letter with a clear ask for money in it, in most states that's going to be considered a solicitation, even though it's just part of the newsletter. And I guarantee you that's the case. What about posting a request for donations on Facebook, which you don't know where all the people who follow us live? Again, that's going to be just like an email solicitation. If you post a request for donations on Facebook, once you get a sense of where the people, again, that's a passive donation request because people have to find your Facebook page. You're not aggressively putting it out there. I think that once you know where the people are, like because they've given you the information, you've directed them to your website where they put in their name and address or things like that, because you're going to send them a receipt or something. Once you know that, now you know where you live. You may not know it initially, but you will once you resolicit them. Do Charleston Principles apply to a family member who lives in another state who decides to donate where I work? No, I don't think so because, well, I think that you're okay. I don't think you have a problem there because you're not, you're not really soliciting that person. They're coming to you, you're not coming to them. And then what if you don't know the state in which an email solicitation is going? Again, like I said, you can't be held responsible if you don't know where the person lives, but once you get the money back, like through a credit card donation or a check or something, you're going to start knowing where they are, and then you're going to be held accountable from that time forward. Getting clarity on the member requirement. If your organization is just starting and it is just you, who would be the members to list on the application? You don't have to list your members on the application, the charitable solicitation. You have to list your board members. And in order to incorporate in just about every state, a nonprofit organization has to have 3 board members. It's a basic requirement. So the first thing is you have to get 2 other board members, and then you have to list them on your application. But anybody who's not a board member, or an officer, you generally don't have to list them. So with that, I think that's the last question. Someone asked if we provide services for registration. The answer is no. Sorry. So there are firms that specialize it. Generally speaking, if you're a nationwide organization and you're soliciting you're registering just about every state that's available, it's going to cost you between the fees and the attorney's fees and the application fees. It's probably going to cost you about $12,000, $13,000 a year to register throughout the country. That's about what we pay, and it's just a cost of doing business. It's an ouch. Like I said, the tough part is in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, you're looking at a yearly fee of around, if say you're $500,000 or $1 million, you're looking at an annual fee of about $1,000 just for the pay of the fees, or $800 just to pay the fees, which is kind of ouch, but it is what it is. Here's some DCRA website, the Virginia website, the Maryland website. Here's another a webinar that we did in November. It's how to handle charitable contributions, and what that means is the receipting requirements. So if you want to have more information about receipts, how to issue receipts, who gets a receipt, what has to be included in the receipt. It doesn't matter if it's money versus stock versus gifts in kind. I recommend that webinar for you, and that should give you all the information. So with that, I want to say thank you for participating in the webinar. I hope you found it helpful. And what we're going to do, as I said, is it is recorded. We will post a link on our website so that you can listen to it again. And feel free to reach out to the DC Bar Pro Bono Center if you have any additional need for legal help. We are happy to match nonprofits with pro bono legal counsel. We'll also add you to our mailing list for further educational seminars that are coming up. And we hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.